Hello everyone and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to be discussing some important quotes from Act 2 of William Shakespeare's Othello. Remember that quotes are really important to study so that you can integrate them into your literature essay body paragraphs so that you have a piece of evidence in order to prove the stance that you've taken and the argument you are pursuing. Please make sure that you watch the video on how to integrate quotes. That's a really important one in general on how you need to be selecting quotes, how you need to be integrating them into your essay. And then I've also done a video on Act 1 quotes, so I would definitely recommend that you watch that first. So we're going to go through a whole bunch of different quotes. You obviously do not have to know them all, but I would recommend you choose the ones that you think are going to prove your arguments the most. Remember, the best quote to study is a quote that can be applied to different characters and different scenarios. In brackets, I've always put who says the quote, but remember that's not necessarily who the quote is about. So always make sure that you remember that, or actually that you take note. If you're going to study a quote, write down the quote in your quotes list and always put in brackets what it's referring to, what character it's referring to, what theme it's referring to, so that you know when to actually use it in your essay. So let's get into the quotes. Act 2, Scene 1. In terms of plot, our wars are done. That's just a simple one. The fact that once they arrive in Cyprus, there's actually no wars to fight because the Turkish fleet have not been able to arrive due to the tempest, due to the storm. The man commands like a full soldier. This is a quote by Montano, but he is talking about Othello here, and he's talking about how Othello's reputation precedes him. A maid that paragons description and wild fame. This is Cassio talking about Desdemona, and he says that she is such a beautiful woman, and basically Othello is really lucky because she's beautiful. You are pictures out of doors, bells in your parlors, wildcats in your kitchen, saints in your injuries, devils being offended. This is one of Iago's lines, and this is when he is just insulting all women altogether. So if you do get an essay about maybe women, about Emilia and Desdemona, this is a quote that shows you sort of what they're up against in this society. Iago says that women are innately tricksters, that they pretend to be something in public, but in private they're actually these devils, he says. "O fie upon thee, slanderer." This is one of Desdemona's first lines in Act 2, and this is her response to Iago's claim about women. And she sort of stands up for herself and Emilia and says, stop saying these terrible things. I think it's a really interesting line because Desdemona is the one to speak up against Iago, and later on we see she doesn't necessarily speak up for herself when Othello starts accusing her. I mean, she does talk, she does say she hasn't done anything wrong, but it's actually then Emilia who's, stronger in terms of the way that she responds to it. So I just thought this was interesting because it's sort of like this inversion. "For I am nothing if not critical." This is a really good line because Iago says it about himself, and that's very true. He says that he's a critical person, which is like a hallmark of his personality. "But does foul pranks which fair and wise ones do." Iago's another comment about women. He says whether women are beautiful or ugly, they are still going to be tricksters. They're still going to trick you and fool you. And deception is a very integral theme in this play because Othello believes that he's been deceived by Desdemona when in reality he's being deceived by Iago. He speaks home. Cassio says this about Iago, and it basically means he speaks bluntly. Like, he doesn't coat his words and anything. He just says what he thinks. I think it's interesting because Iago is critical and he is blunt, but at the same time, everything he says is laced with so much meaning because he is constantly manipulating everyone around him. "If such tricks as these strip you out of your lieutenantry, This is Iago. He talks about Cassio, and he basically has this little aside. Remember, aside is when a character has like a quick line or two to another person on stage or to the audience, and the rest of the people on stage can't hear. So this is after Cassio has greeted Desdemona and Emilia, and he does this big whole, You know, he's he comes across as a ladies' man, so he does this big sort of gesture, and Iago has this little moment where he whispers, this ladies' man personality trait of yours is gonna eventually strip you of your lieutenantcy, which is, we know it's gonna happen at the end of this act already. If I were now to die, there now to be most happy, for I fear my soul hath her content so absolute. Sorry, I don't know why I put a random apostrophe or inverted comma in the middle of that. But this is Othello. He's so happy to see Desdemona, and he says if he was to die now, he would be happy because his soul is so content. Desdemona is directly in love with him. This is Iago's line, and he's basically saying that Desdemona is absolutely in love with Othello. And it's important that this is recognized by Othello, that this is this two-sided love, and he's still going to mess with it, and he's still going to say to Rodrigo that he will still help him try and break this relationship up. Bragging and telling her fantastical lies. Iago claims this is how Othello managed to get Desdemona to love him, by bragging and telling her all these crazy lies. Handsome, young, and hath all the requisites in him that folly and green minds look after. Iago, sorry about the spelling mistake there, the H should be a G. Iago about Othello as well. He says Othello he's handsome, he's young, and so he can sort of get any maiden he wants, and he can lie. She's full of a most blessed condition. Rodrigo says this about Desdemona, which is really interesting because he says Desdemona's a moral, good lady. So as much as Rodrigo is slightly creepy, or quite creepy, in his pursuit of Desdemona, who has clearly no interest in him, he does admit, or he does recognize that she is this moral person, whereas Iago doesn't recognize that at the moment. Find some occasion to anger Cassio. This is Iago's big plan, and this is what he tells Rodrigo, because his plan is he's going to get Cassio drunk, and he tells Rodrigo to pick a fight with him. Find some occasion to anger Cassio. It's a really nice quote because there's no pronouns in there, so it doesn't become complicated in terms of figuring out who says who and whatever. So if you've watched the integrate quotes video, you'll see how pronouns can sometimes be an issue when you're trying to quote, because it really takes away the fluidity of the sentence. So this is quite a nice quote in that regard. He's rash and very sudden in color. Iago says this about Cassio, another great line. He says that he is quick to anger. A most dear husband. Iago admits that Othello is probably a very good husband. And then he says, I do suspect the lusty Moor hath leapt into my seat. Leapt into my seat. Iago says this about Othello. This is in his soliloquy right at the end of the scene, where he says that he's sort of giving reasons as to why he's doing what he's doing, and he's explaining to the audience his thought process. And he says that he suspects that Othello has slept with his wife. And this is the sort of opportunistic, villainous aspect of his character. Till I am evened with him, wife for wife. He's like, I'm going to get revenge on him till we're even, wife for wife. At least into a jealousy so strong that judgment cannot cure. This is Iago's big plan. He's going to make Othello so jealous that his judgment is clouded, which is exactly what ends up happening. He talks about how he's going to get Rodrigo involved, and he calls Rodrigo the poor trash of Venice. That's a very nice quote because it's nice and simple, but it conveys a lot, because it conveys on how Iago sees Rodrigo. He just sees him as a pawn in his games. He doesn't see him as anything honorable. He is using Rodrigo. For I fear Cassio with my nightcap too. And now Iago is further giving himself reasons. He says he fears that Cassio's also slept with his wife. So I don't know what that tells you about Iago's thoughts on his wife, if he believes that Othello has been with her as well as Cassio. Makes the Moor thank me, love me, and reward me. So that's his big plan now. He's going to make the Moor, he's going to make Othello love him and reward him, and then he's going to make him so jealous that judgment is going to fall off the face of the earth. His ability to be rational is going to subside. Act 2, Scene 2, there are no quotes of importance in my opinion. Act 2, Scene 3. Iago is most honest, that's Othello. He's always saying things like that, and that's the theme of appearance versus reality, because Iago appears to be honest to Othello, but in reality he's not. And then we get this very interesting conversation between Iago and Cassio, and they're basically just saying how beautiful Desdemona is. She is sport for Jove, Iago says about Desdemona, like she's good enough for like Jupiter, the king of the gods. She is the most exquisite lady. She is indeed perfection. So they're talking about how amazing Desdemona is, and it sort of gives us this implication how she's very much sought after, and yeah, that sort of anyone would be lucky to marry her. Then this is one of the most used quotes, and it's a really good quote. I have very poor and unhappy brains for drinking. This is Cassio, and he says that he does not want to drink because he does not do well with alcohol. And obviously Iago knows this and he's still going to convince him, but this is Cassio saying that he doesn't want to drink. He says, I am unfortunate in the infirmity and dare not task my weakness with any more. Cassio again says, no, I'm not going to have something to drink. I've already had a little bit and I'm not going to task my weakness. I'm not going to test myself. I know that I don't do well with this stuff. And then Iago says he's going to make him full of quarrel and offense. That's his big plan. He obviously doesn't say it to Cassio. And then this is such an interesting conversation, I think, because it's between Iago and Montano. And this really paints this picture of Iago being such a sly, manipulative, clever villain, because he doesn't just have one story that he's telling. He doesn't just have one lie. He's literally telling different lies to different people. And I find that absolutely fascinating. And that's why we really have to have those soliloquies where we can understand what's happening in Iago's head, because he is literally telling a different story to every single person. And so now he's talking about Cassio to Montano, and he says he is a soldier fit to stand by Caesar, meaning he is an amazing soldier. He is honorable. He is so reputable. He is like such an honorable person. He's fit to stand by Caesar. I fear the trust Othello puts him in. Then he's like, I fear that Othello trusts him too much. And then he claims that Cassio is an alcoholic, which is not true. He says, 'tis evermore the prologue to his sleep. He says, every night he drinks himself to sleep. Would so much to cure him of this evil. And then he claims, I would do anything to cure him of this terrible alcoholism. And so do you see how he's putting this picture in Montano's brain? And later on, when Cassio is going to come in, when he screams, you rogue, you rascal, he has come in drunk, Montano has this whole story about how he's this drunken alcoholic, so he's going to react very violently to him because of this. Whereas if Iago hadn't spoken about this, perhaps he would have been he would have reacted differently to Cassio based on the man he knows. Go out and cry mutiny. This is an aside. Iago says this to Rodrigo once Cassio comes in and he's clearly being aggressive and he's drunk. Iago says to Rodrigo, go out and wake everyone up, right? Cause a disturbance. Cassio and Montano are involved in a fight, and Iago says, have you forgot all place of sense and duty? He says, have you forgotten yourselves? Like, why are you fighting? I cannot speak any beginning to this peevish odds, and would in action glorious I lost the legs that brought me a part of it. Iago, so dramatic. He says, I have no idea how this started. I would actually rather lose my legs because I don't want to be a part of it. So very dramatic. And he basically claims absolutely no responsibility in this, even though he has been the mastermind behind this. My blood begins my safer guides to rule. So Othello has been woken by the disturbance. He comes and he is extremely angry. He doesn't know what's happened. He's wanting to get answers out of them, but he's seen his lieutenant, one of his main, his main soldiers, has now gone and disgraced himself. And this is, he's very, very angry. And he says, my blood begins my safer guides to rule. He says, my rationality is ceasing. I'm getting really angry now. And this is important because that's one of our key themes is this passion versus reason. And up to this point, Othello's been quite reasonable, he's been quite rational. And now he even admits he's becoming angry, so he's going to be ruled a little bit more by passion here. And what does Iago do? Once again, dramatic. He says, I had rather have this tongue cut from my mouth than it should do offense to Michael Cassio. Meaning, I'd rather have my tongue cut out than I should say anything bad about Cassio, which is utterly hilarious. Well, not hilarious, but quite ironic. But men are men, the best sometimes forget. And he tells the story, Iago tells the story, which Othello is going to believe straight away. He's not going to ask for anyone else's opinion. But he tries to make Cassio out to be good. So he says, and Cassio did this and this and this, like really bad. But, men are men. Like, we all make mistakes sometimes. Sometimes we forget. And Othello sees, and Iago's such a master manipulator in that sense, because he's put all the blame on Cassio, but at the same time he's made it seem like he's Cassio's friend. And even Othello says, you're making it light to Cassio, you're actually being nice to Cassio, you're trying to shield him, you're trying to protect him. And Othello sees through this, or he thinks he sees through this. He thinks that he's quite smart, and he says, Cassio, I love thee, but never more be officer of mine. So he completely believes Iago's story from the get-go, and he says, you are never going to be an officer of mine. So that's a really nice quote, where he's basically firing him. And then Cassio says, reputation, 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 oh, I've lost my reputation. Reputation is such an important theme in this play. Honor and reputation are really important, and for Cassio, that's his most prized possession. His most prized possession is his reputation. And so, it's not the best quote to use. I would use the next quote on the next slide to prove reputation, because if you just quote reputation, it's not very impactful. But I'll show you the next one that you can use to prove this theme of reputation and how much it means to Cassio. So here it is, where he says, I have lost the immortal part of myself, and what remains is bestial. Cassio believes that his reputation is the part that makes him human. He believes what's left of him now is just animalistic, because he's lost his honor, he's lost his reputation. And so that's a really good quote to use. It's the immortal part of myself, and what remains is bestial. So without his reputation, he feels like he's nothing. And Iago responds with something interesting. He says, reputation is an idle and most false imposition, oft got without merit and lost without deserving. And this is an important line if you're digging deeper into the theme of reputation, because Iago says reputation is such a, it's actually something false. It's not actually true. It's not a true reflection of who you are. It's something that others put onto you, and it can be taken away, or it can be put on without your permission. It's not actually a solid representation of who you are. And that's very insightful, because Iago's reputation does not match who he really is. Just like Cassio's reputation now, where he's lost his reputation, doesn't match who he really is. But definitely Iago's, because Iago's reputation is this honest Iago. And in reality he's not. And here Iago acknowledges that reputation is false. This comes back in Act 3 a little bit, when Iago and Othello are having a discussion. So keep that in mind. Sue to him again and he's yours. So remember, Iago has come across as friend to everyone now, and he's even friends with Cassio. And he advises Cassio that Othello will change his mind. You must just go plead with him. He says, mend it for your own good. Also ironic, because he's not actually mending it. He's not actually asking Cassio. He's saying to Cassio that you should go for your own good and try to get your job back. But in reality, Iago wants him to go beg, because it's going to serve Iago's plan. This is a really good quote. Our general's wife is now the general. When we think about influence, that's we usually think about, Othello and Iago and Rodrigo and Iago and Cassio. But here's a little, a different version of it. I don't think there's enough information to write a full paragraph on it. But basically, Iago says that Desdemona is now actually the general, because she has so much influence over Othello. So whatever Desdemona says, Othello will follow. And we can see that later on when Othello says, I will deny thee nothing, meaning I cannot actually deny Desdemona's requests, because he loves her so much. And so here Iago acknowledges this change, the fact that now Desdemona's married Othello, she actually holds a lot of power. And Iago advises Cassio, another great quote, confess yourself freely to her. So confess and not just confess, but confide in her and ask for her help and ask for her to petition your case for you. I protest in the sincerity of love and honest kindness. Also really ironic, Iago says to Cassio, I am doing this because I love you and I'm your friend, you can trust me. Cassio then says, honest Iago. And then Iago has this soliloquy. He actually has two soliloquies at the end of this scene, if I'm remembering correctly. He says, when devils will the blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows as I do now. So he's concocting the next part of his plan. He says, when a devil is going to commit the worst sins, he always puts on this heavenly face. He always puts on this angelic persona, just as I do now. He's pretending to be this amazing person and this friend to everyone. And that's when he's going to commit his greatest sin. And she for him pleads strongly to the Moor. He says that Desdemona is going to plead with Othello that Cassio be reinstated. And Iago says, I'll pour pestilence into his ear. That's one of my favorite quotes. I think it's such a good way to describe the influence that Iago has over Othello. He's going to pour pestilence into his ear. He's going to corrupt Othello's interpretation of what this pleading means, where in fact it's really innocent, but he's going to make Othello believe that it's got to do with something else. Then he talks to Rodrigo, and Rodrigo claims he has no money at all. He has given it all to Iago. He's sold all his land. He's given all his money to him. And this is really emphasizes just how manipulative Iago is, because he's really done nothing to help Rodrigo's case or what he's promised Rodrigo. And Rodrigo is very gullible and just gives him all his money. And then Iago says something really interesting, because Rodrigo's like, come on, this is taking too long. I've given you all my money. Why is Desdemona not broken up with Othello? Why is she not my wife, sort of thing? Because that's the reason why he's been giving all the money. And Iago says, thou knowest we work by wit and not by witchcraft. He says, we work by intelligence, we work by intellect, we don't just work by magic. And that really gives us an insight into why Iago is so successful as this villain. It's because he's extremely smart. He's extremely clever. He realizes he's not just going to get his revenge in a single click or a single moment. He has to create this entire plot, this entire plan, using wit, using intellect, and then he's going to get what he wants. And Rodrigo doesn't understand that. Rodrigo needs to happen instantaneously. But Iago understands the complexity behind enacting revenge. So that's a really good quote to showcase Iago's sort of the intentional aspect behind his villainous acts. My wife must move for Cassio to her mistress. I'll set her on. This is back to the soliloquy. Iago says he needs his wife to be involved in this because Emilia is Desdemona's attendant. So he's going to need her help. He's going to set her on to this. He's going to make sure that she helps his plan, that she allows Cassio to see Desdemona. And then his plan, he may find Cassio soliciting his wife, and he's going to make Othello see Cassio and Desdemona together, and he's going to make him believe things that are not true. And then he says, dull not devised by coldness and delay. He's like, all right, I've got the plan, let's get going. Let's not let speed be the problem here. Let's enact my plan straight away so that I can enact this revenge easily. I hope that was helpful. Please remember to watch the integrating quotes video for it to all make sense. Also, just a note, I haven't put any inverted commas in here, but obviously when you're actually using the quotes, you must use inverted commas to indicate that it is from the text. I hope that was helpful. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.